Nate Miller stepped off the ship after 6 long months at sea, his boots hitting the solid ground with a weight that felt heavier than usual. He had imagined this moment countless times during the endless nights of duty, picturing the soft light of the porch, the familiar smell of pine wood, and Sarah's warm embrace waiting for him. She was there when he arrived, standing still at the edge of the driveway. She smiled, but the smile was thin, stretched like a fragile thread ready to snap. Her eyes, once bright and full of life, seemed muted now, dulled by something he couldn't immediately name. At first glance, nothing appeared out of place. The grass was neatly trimmed, the flower beds weeded, the porch freshly painted. Inside, the house seemed untouched, preserved like an exhibit behind glass. The photographs on the walls captured frozen memories: their wedding day, the first dog they had adopted, the sunset hikes in Colorado. Yet in the midst of all this familiarity, there was a sterile emptiness. The air smelled too clean, the furniture too deliberately arranged, the surfaces too polished. It reminded him of the officers' quarters he had once stayed in, technically perfect, emotionally barren. Nate told himself it was normal. 6 months was a long time. People changed, houses changed, feelings shifted under the pressure of waiting. He pushed away the unease that prickled under his skin, attributing Sarah's distant manner to the strain of his absence. He chose to believe that, given enough time, the rhythm they had once shared would return. He unpacked his duffel bag quietly, setting his gear down in the spare room rather than their bedroom, telling himself it was just for now, just until he got used to solid ground again. Meals were eaten in polite silence, the clatter of utensils louder than any conversation. At night he listened to the creaks of the house, sounds he once found comforting, now oddly hollow. Nate went through the motions of settling back in, fixing a loose hinge on the gate, clearing the gutters, oiling the garage door that had begun to stick. Each small repair was a ritual, a way of convincing himself that the foundation of his life was still firm, that the cracks he sensed were only in his imagination. But deep down, beneath the routines and the forced smiles, Nate felt it. Something vital had shifted. Like a ship straying off course by a few degrees, it wasn't immediately visible, but if left uncorrected, it would lead him far from any shore he recognized. He didn't yet know how far the current had already carried him from the life he thought he was returning to. In the weeks that followed, the uneasy feeling that Nate Miller had tried to ignore grew heavier, like humidity before a violent storm. Small inconsistencies began to catch his eye, things he might have overlooked if he had truly believed everything was fine. His old pickup truck still sat in the driveway, right where he had left it, but the plates were different now, temporary ones, issued just a few months earlier. It made no sense. The truck had been fully registered and insured before he left. Shrugging off the discomfort, he decided to take care of errands he had postponed since his return. That was when the second blow struck. His credit cards, the same ones he had relied on for years, were repeatedly declined. At first, he blamed the banks, thinking it was a simple issue of flagged transactions after months of inactivity. But when he called customer service, the answers grew murky. Account names had changed. Some cards were closed entirely. His savings account, once a quiet pillar of security, was reduced to a fraction of what he remembered. Confused and increasingly alarmed, Nate checked the mail more closely. Letters addressed to other names trickled in, bearing addresses that should have been his. Notices from banks he had never dealt with, insurance companies he had never signed with. He tried to bring it up with Sarah to piece together a reasonable explanation, but every conversation ended before it began. She brushed him off with tired excuses about mix-ups and clerical errors, her tone more impatient each time, her distance growing more tangible. One afternoon, feeling a rising urgency he could no longer ignore, Nate climbed up to the attic. It was meant to be a short visit, just retrieving his old sea journals, maybe grounding himself in memories that felt real and uncorrupted. The ladder creaked under his weight as he pulled himself into the dusty space, expecting to see the neatly labeled boxes where he had left them. Instead, he found emptiness. Bare beams stretched across the attic, dusty and neglected. Boxes he had packed with care, his journals, his photographs, even his grandfather's old compass, were missing without a trace. Only a few broken pieces of tape clung to the wooden floor, like the aftermath of a quiet theft. The realization settled over him, cold and final. These were not isolated incidents, not accidents born from miscommunication. The fabric of his life had been altered while he was away, stitched together by hands he could no longer trust. Nate stood there for a long time, in the hollow attic under the muted light, feeling the final pieces of his old life slipping beyond reach. He descended the ladder with a slow, deliberate heaviness. The house around him, once his shelter, felt suddenly unfamiliar, its walls whispering of decisions made in his absence. Nate understood then that what he had returned to was not the life he left behind, but something altogether different, fragile, and cracked beneath the surface. A few days later, Nate stumbled upon the truth, not through confrontation or confession, but by accident. While cleaning the kitchen, he reached for a stack of unopened mail that had been sitting untouched on the high shelf above the coffee maker. Most of it was junk, catalogs, political flyers, expired coupons, but tucked between the clutter was a thick envelope bearing a law firm's insignia. His name was printed in stiff, official type, but it was the date that stopped him cold. The documents inside were crisp, smelling faintly of printer ink and stale air. A divorce notification, filed and finalized 3 months earlier, while he had been thousands of miles away in the Atlantic. The process had been carried out in his absence, neatly without contest, without the slightest chance for him to defend himself. His signature was nowhere required. Under the laws of the state, if the respondent could not be reached and sufficient notice was given through public channels, the court could proceed without consent. In black and white, he read the division of assets. The house was awarded entirely to Sarah. Their joint accounts were split in a way that left him with almost nothing. Even the modest retirement fund he had painstakingly built over years at sea was gone, dissolved into legal fees and claims. The life he thought they had built together had been dismantled piece by piece while he braved storms, endless shifts, and the grinding loneliness of open water. Shock gave way to a hollow numbness. Nate sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the envelope slipping from his hand onto the floor. Around him, the house remained silent, indifferent. It no longer felt like a home. It was a shell filled with memories that no longer belonged to him. For months he had fought waves and winds, trusting that the land he was returning to would remain steady, a place to anchor his weary body and spirit. Instead, the ground itself had shifted beneath him, leaving him adrift in a life that no longer recognized his claim. The betrayal pierced deeper than any physical wound, cutting through the years of sacrifice, loyalty, and unspoken hopes he had carried across every mile of ocean. Nate sat there long after the sun had dipped behind the trees, the cold creeping up from the floorboards. He knew then that the hardest battle was not fought on the sea, but on the shores of trust, where promises could be broken in the silence of a single unopened letter. Nate refused to accept defeat without understanding the full extent of what had happened. In the days that followed his discovery, he pored over every piece of paper he could find. He built a timeline from scattered documents, piecing together dates, signatures, and transaction records like a man assembling the wreckage of a ship after a storm. Each small discovery deepened the chasm beneath him. He learned that months before his return, Sarah had systematically dismantled their shared life. She had sold off his collection of antique watches, pieces he had spent decades acquiring during foreign port calls, through private auctions that left no clear trail back to her. Proceeds from their joint bank accounts had been siphoned away through a series of quiet withdrawals, always just small enough to avoid raising immediate suspicion. Some accounts were simply emptied, others closed altogether. Digging deeper, Nate uncovered records of fabricated debts. Lines of credit he had never opened appeared on their financial statements, loans secured against their home, and immediately defaulted on. At first he thought it was a mistake, but the patterns were too deliberate. Names of shell companies, addresses that led to vacant lots or mail drops. It became clear these debts were tools, designed to erode what was his from the inside out. Central to it all was a single document, a power of attorney notarized months prior, granting Sarah sweeping authority over his affairs. The signature on the form mimicked his handwriting with unsettling precision, but Nate knew he had never signed it. Further investigation revealed that the notary public responsible for the verification was already under indictment for document forgery, operating out of a strip mall office a few towns over. As Nate connected the dots, a new figure emerged from the margins of the story. Rick, a man Sarah had introduced as an old family friend, was in fact a former real estate attorney with a tarnished reputation. Court records showed a history of malpractice suits, quiet settlements, and revoked licenses in 2 states. Rick understood the hidden cracks in the system, the gray areas where laws bent without breaking. He had helped Sarah navigate the legal mazes, exploiting loopholes and technicalities to erase Nate from his own life. It was not a case of a broken marriage or emotional drift. It was an orchestrated campaign, planned long before Nate set foot back on American soil. Every action had been calculated, every signature forged with intent. Nate realized that he had not merely been abandoned. He had been strategically dismantled, piece by piece, until nothing recognizable remained. Nate knew he could not fight this battle alone. He reached out to people he had trusted in his previous life. Old attorneys he had worked with during maritime disputes, former military legal officers who understood the nuances of complex cases, and seasoned private investigators who specialized in uncovering hidden fraud. Reassembling a team was not easy. Many had moved on, retired, or shifted careers. But piece by piece, he built a network capable of striking back. The investigation took months. Nate lived in a cramped motel room near the county courthouse, pouring his time and dwindling resources into building his case. Every day was a grind of paperwork, depositions, and long hours chasing leads that often led nowhere. He refused to be discouraged. With painstaking effort, the cracks in Sarah's carefully constructed narrative began to widen. The evidence mounted slowly but steadily. Handwriting experts confirmed that his signature on the power of attorney had been forged. Bank records showed withdrawals authorized by documents he had never seen. Property transfers bore notarizations dated suspiciously close to his deployment dates, when he had been thousands of miles from any land-based office. Some financial moves were sloppier than others, revealing inconsistencies that no competent attorney could ignore. Through the private investigators, Nate uncovered Rick's deeper involvement. Paper trails linked him directly to the companies that had purchased Nate's possessions at cut-rate prices. One of the shell companies was registered to a P.O. box leased in Rick's name. The layers of deception unraveled, revealing a pattern of collusion that could no longer be dismissed as mere coincidence. With this arsenal of evidence, Nate's legal team filed a suit not just against Sarah, but also against Rick and the notary. They accused them of fraud, forgery, and unlawful transfer of assets. The court proceedings were grueling. Sarah's attorneys fought to delay and dismiss, but the weight of the documentation was impossible to ignore. Witnesses were called, including the discredited notary, who eventually cracked under cross-examination and admitted to falsifying multiple signatures for a cash payment. After nearly a year of litigation, the court delivered its ruling. The divorce was declared void due to fraud. All financial transactions conducted under the fraudulent power of attorney were invalidated. Nate was awarded back ownership of the house and a portion of the funds that could be traced and recovered. While some assets were lost forever, the core of his life, the tangible proof of his years of work and sacrifice, was restored. He walked out of the courthouse exhausted but lighter. His name had been cleared, and for the first time in a long while, Nate felt the solid ground of his own life beneath his feet once more. After the legal battles were finally over, Nate knew he could not stay in the house that had once symbolized everything he thought was permanent. The walls, though familiar, held too many echoes of betrayal. Without hesitation, he put the property up for sale, severing the last material tie to the life that had collapsed around him. When the house sold, he packed what little he had reclaimed and set out to find a place that could truly offer a fresh start. He settled on the coast of North Carolina, drawn to the quiet resilience of a small seaside town where the air smelled of salt and pine, and the horizon stretched wide and open. There, on a narrow strip of land, he found a modest cottage nestled near an old lighthouse. The beacon, weathered by storms yet still standing, spoke to him in ways words never could. It reminded him of perseverance, of holding steady through darkness, and of guiding others safely home. Nate embraced the solitude. He spent his mornings walking along the dunes, letting the rhythm of the waves recalibrate his spirit. The lighthouse became a landmark in his days, its steady pulse cutting through the misty evenings like a silent promise that no storm could last forever. Seeking purpose beyond his own healing, Nate accepted a position at the local maritime academy. There, he taught young cadets the art of navigation, anchoring each lesson not only in technical skills, but also in principles of integrity and resilience. He found satisfaction in watching them learn, seeing in their eager faces the same spark that had once driven him across oceans. The scars Sarah had left would never fully disappear. Some nights still carried the sharp ache of betrayal, surfacing unbidden in dreams or in the hollow spaces between conversations. But those moments no longer defined him. They had become part of the bedrock he now stood upon. Painful, yes, but also a testament to survival. Nate rebuilt his life not by chasing what had been lost, but by embracing what endured. In every careful chart plotted across a classroom desk, in every confident answer from a student, he found small, steady affirmations that he was forging something real again. He had lost many things, but he had reclaimed something far more valuable, his dignity. And standing alone beneath the endless Carolina sky, with the lighthouse casting its unwavering light out to sea, Nate knew he was exactly where he was meant to be.